This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on India-Australia Economic Partnership for a Better Tomorrow. The participants are Anil Wadhwa, former ambassador, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Today we are discussing the India-Australia relationship in the background of the fact that the two countries have recently signed a landmark free trade deal, and this deal will cause 1 million jobs also. India and Australia on Saturday has inked the India-Australia Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement. This was done in a virtual ceremony attended by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison. Ambassador Wadhwa, when you see this deal which was being worked on for quite a while, how significant is this deal for the India-Australia relationship, bilateral ties, and especially for the economic aspect of that relationship?
India has emerged as an ideal strategic partner for Australia because it is striving to overcome its challenges of rapid urbanization and infrastructure development, and also resources like clean water, digital connectivity, and health amenities for a growing and aspirational population. We've seen over the past few years how excellent prospects have emerged for collaboration between India and Australia in some very critical areas. So that's not just science now, of course, pandemic and vaccines management, but also things like space and defense, critical minerals and related technologies, water resources, training, education, the circular economy, grains management and logistics, and also cyber technologies. India also needs Australian commodities like lithium, cobalt, vanadium, rare earths, coal and LNG for its development needs, and also technology to solve problems in areas like financial inclusion, healthcare, education, all jointly with Australia. One other point is that Australia has reserves of 21 of the 49 minerals identified as critical for India's future strategy, especially the e-mobility program. And then we have the new education policy in India, which has opened up possibilities for further collaboration with Australian universities. We now have 100,000 students who are enrolled in Australian universities. Plus, new possibilities have opened up in defense and space. India has a large technology resource pool that is very complementary to Australian requirements, and Australian super funds and infrastructure companies now have a big opportunity in the infrastructure and toll road sector in India. So what we've seen over the last few years is that our investments are driving our trade. Roughly $20 billion each has been invested into each other's economies. This year, bilateral trade has also spurted. It is poised to cross $27 billion US. But the liberalization of trade and services and steps towards ease of doing business have always been felt to be essential to add immensely to this momentum. And therefore, there is now a new optimism after the announcement of the Australia-India Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, which will be followed by a second phase of the agreement by the end of 2022. And actually, both sides have been trying to achieve this result since 2011. In 2015, after 9 rounds, all these efforts were stopped, and then there was a relaunch of negotiations by the trade ministers in September 2021. Then there's been a last mile push by our prime ministers. So now we have a very comprehensive agreement. It will cover most of the items of bilateral trade and also specific areas of interest to both sides in the services sector, which includes financial services, telecommunication services, professional services, foreign investment framework. Everything has been spelled out. So in that respect, I feel that this agreement is really, really significant. It's a win-win for both sides.
Ambassador Wadhwa, we also see that this pact was inked as the India-Australia relations, and this went on for 10 years in the making. Prime Minister Modi, after signing of the deal, said that consensus on such an important agreement in such a short period of time shows the mutual trust between the two countries. This is truly a watershed moment for our bilateral relations. He also said there is great potential between our two economies to fulfill each other's needs. With this agreement, we will be able to benefit from opportunities. On the basis of this agreement, together we will be able to contribute to increasing supply chain resilience and stability of the Indo-Pacific region. Ambassador Wadhwa, we also see that the mention of the Indo-Pacific region and the stability of the region has become an important aspect of the India-Australia relationship. How important do you think is this facet in the relationship today, and also in the context of signing of this agreement?
The current trend of geoeconomics favors enhancement of investment and trade relationship with reliable partners. And if you recall, the comprehensive strategic partnership between India and Australia, which was announced in June 2020, along with the agreements that we had on providing mutual logistics, so their partnership in the Quad and also participation in Malabar exercise has reinforced the shared security outlook. Then we've also seen that the Australian, Indian, and Japanese trade and commerce ministers have also met thrice and announced broad contours of a resilient supply chains initiative. Now, coming to the bilateral relationship, Australia has recently announced initiatives which total 210 million US dollars to address the bilateral investment cooperation in some very important sectors like critical minerals, clean energy, cyber and critical technologies, and space. And then the priority sectors of infrastructure, education, tourism, agribusiness, and energy. Also, Australia will launch a Center for Australia-India Relations.
We also see that this agreement will help in improving the bilateral trade. It is expected that from a USD 27 billion, this will grow to USD 45 to $50 billion in the next 5 years. And Australia is also offering zero duty access to India for about 96.4% of exports. And this will also cover many products which currently attract 4 to 5% customs duty in Australia. The labor-intensive sectors which would gain immensely include textiles and apparel, agriculture, leather, footwear. So we see this great impact this agreement will have in real terms in terms of the job creation. How much do you think is this going to help? One, of course, is the relationship, but also the fact that this investment will help in job creation. So how significant does that become?
You're right about the fact that over 96.4% of Indian goods by value, 98% of our tariff lines, they will get zero duty access on day one of the pact, and the rest will get it in a phase. Also, 85% of Australian goods exported to India will see reduced tariffs. That's valued at more than 12.6 billion a year. This will rise to almost 91%, in value terms about $13.4 billion over 10 years. So you rightly pointed out that India will gain from duty-free access for a host of labor-intensive sectors, and it has also been agreed to have a separate chapter, by the way, on pharmaceutical products of this agreement, which will expedite the approval of patented, generic, and biosimilar medicines. Then we also have a liberalized visa regime in this agreement. This will allow easier movement of professionals. And of course, we have to bear in mind that some sensitive sectors like dairy, sunflower oil, wheat, sugar, rice, walnuts, apples, oilseeds, and medical device, etc., they've been kept out. One important aspect is also the reduced duty on Australian wines, which will be staggered over the next 10 years or so. And in certain cases, India has been wise to tie concessions to a quantitative cap. For example, India will only allow the long staple cotton at zero duty, but it's subject to a cap of 300,000 bales, which is actually less than 1% of its annual domestic consumption. And another important aspect is that the Australian coal, which used to attract 2.5% duty, will also enjoy duty-free access, along with elimination of tariffs on some very important commodities like alumina, metallic ores that includes manganese, copper, and nickel, also LNG and critical minerals that include titanium and zirconium. So all this amounts to a situation where both sides are gaining a lot. This rationalization of the elimination of tariffs will, of course, boost existing bilateral trade and also encourage investments in both the countries. Now, tied to this is also the issue of services, where India has always tried in all bilateral FTAs that the services side should be strengthened and open up as much as possible. In this agreement, we see that India has got access in about 135 subsectors and MFN status in 120 subsectors. Then Australia has got access in 103 subsectors and MFN status in 31 subsectors. As we know, there are a total of 11 broad service sectors which we've been talking about. And so this will encourage the flow of professionals and lead to a reinforcement of each other's economies.
Mr. Vadza, we also see that when we talk of India-Australia relations and we see this agreement signed today, we've discussed the Indo-Pacific, and we've also seen that increasingly both India, Australia, along with other countries in the world, have been wary of China's rise. Do you feel that this agreement today also brings India and Australia closer? And this is also a partnership which is good for the region in the sense that it somehow also sends a message to countries like China, whose growth has been very aggressive and whose growth has made a lot of countries around the world very uncomfortable.
I think one of the main reasons why Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has been looking to diversify trade and investments for his country is because of the aggressive rise of China and the actions that the Australian economy has faced over the past 2 to 3 years because of aggressive Chinese actions. So while the agreement signature was on, he made a remark which is very telling, and he said that this agreement would create enormous trade diversification opportunities for Australian producers, service providers bound for India, which is already valued at $14.8 billion each year. But what he has in mind really is the fact that Australia has found a new market for its products at an enhanced level. And of course, Australia will continue to export what it does, but at the same time, it will also find markets for some of the products that it could not export to India so easily because of tariffs. And by giving concessions to India and the reciprocal concessions that Australia has got, Australia has successfully entered the Indian markets at a much higher level. Now, what this will result in is that it will drive investments from both countries. At the moment, we have $20 billion of investments from both sides into each other's economies, which is also quite substantial. And if we look at the follow-up, which is now on the anvil, we will see that there will be much more ease of doing business between the two countries, much more liberalization of trade as well as services, and that will allow Australia and India to come together in order to make the dependence on China that much lesser. And that's the whole idea about diversification here.
Mr. Vatsa, we also see that the Indian diaspora in Australia has grown considerably. We have students from India going and studying in Australia. We have a lot of young people who've gone to Australia in search of jobs. Do you feel that the diaspora also plays a factor in the bilateral relations? And when we see the deepening of the economic aspect of this relation, the diaspora and the countries, everyone stands to benefit. So it's a win-win for everyone.
You're absolutely right. The total number of Indian students enrolled in various courses in India today is 100,000. The total amount of diaspora which is present in Australia today is about 720,000. And more Indians are finding opportunities in Australia in niche areas and doing pretty well in their professional fields. This agreement, because of its services aspect, will now open up opportunities for Indian professionals in a number of fields, which will then, of course, make Australia much more attractive for Indian workers and also Indian professionals. So going forward, I see a very bright future, and the diaspora will be driving this relationship in the future because of their familiarity with what India has to offer. They will also find places in Australian corporate boards, and recently the Australian government has come out with a diaspora report, which is very, very significant because it talks about taking the help of Indian diaspora in Australia to enhance this relationship further and to make sure that bilateral trade and investments are also expanded in a manner which has not been envisaged in the past. So I feel quite optimistic about the future of the relationship, which will primarily be based on the diaspora's efforts in Australia.
And in the coming days, we will continue our discussions on the India-Australia relationship, its economic aspects and the political aspect. With these comments, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on India-Australia Economic Partnership for a Better Tomorrow. The participants were Anil Wadhwa, former ambassador, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsgtalks@gmail.com.